With at least 8 people known to have died since Monday alone and thousands continuing to shelter in evacuation centres, the terrifying scale of Australia's bushfire disaster is beginning to emerge.
Devastating fires in Australia, killing at least 18 people, forcing tens of thousands from their homes.
The 2019 to 2020 bushfires were some of the most devastating natural disasters to hit Australia. As a result of these fires, more than 11 million hectares of land was burnt. For some scale, this graphic shows what 11 million hectares looks like over the UK, US, and Japan. More than 33 people lost their lives, and over 1 billion mammals, birds, and reptiles were killed. So we're not talking little numbers here. With smoke encompassing most of eastern Australia, making the air quality up to 11 times worse than the hazardous level, it's easy to say that millions of people felt and saw the presence of the fires. During the initial breakout of the fires, warnings of an earlier start to the fire season surfaced. With the drier land due to droughts and warmer temperatures, speculation as to how bad the bushfire season would be started to emerge. But the response wasn't one of extreme panic and worry. This is because bushfires in the summer are a common occurrence here in Australia. In fact, for thousands of years before Europeans ever set foot in Australia, Indigenous Australians used to intentionally set fire to the land so that the forests could regrow. So no one batted an eye when early news reports of the initial fires surfaced. But as time went on, the fires began to grow and spread at increasingly rapid and uncontrollable rates. Naturally, this led to people wondering whether or not climate change was a factor as to why these bushfires were so devastating. When asked this specific question, the PM replied,
"Do you acknowledge that the bushfires are linked in some way to climate change?"
Of course I have. I have all year.
But when asked whether his government's climate policies could be improved, he replied,
What I'm saying is that Australia is meeting and beating our emissions reduction targets.
On the other hand, Greens federal MP Adam Bant was interviewed arguing that the Morrison government, which had only been in office for a few months, had done everything in their power to make these kind of catastrophic bushfires more likely.
Government has had every opportunity to minimise the risk of these catastrophic fires, and instead it has chosen to pour fuel on the fire. Michael McCormack and Scott Morrison bear some responsibility for what is happening at the moment because they have done everything in their power to make these kind of catastrophic bushfires more likely.
Additionally, another party member, Senator Jordan Steele-John, stated that the Morrison government was
no better than a bunch of arsonists.
Now, it's certain that climate change did play a role in worsening these bushfires. This video by news website Vox explains that the bushfires in Australia were in fact linked to floods in Africa. They explain that the Indian Ocean Dipole, or IOD for short, was what specifically worsened the bushfires. The IOD is a temperature gradient that affects the temperature of the surface water across the Indian Ocean, from the edge of East Africa to the edge of Western Australia. There are 3 different types of scenarios when it comes to the IOD. It can either be positive, neutral, or negative. In the case of the bushfires, the IOD was positive, meaning that the winds had shifted the warmer water towards eastern Africa, causing it to evaporate and cause flooding, whilst the cooler water was shifted towards Australia, leading to droughts due to less water being evaporated, as it was colder. A study conducted by Australian scientists later showed that the higher shift of the positive IOD was indeed linked to global warming. The droughts, alongside the fact that 2019 was Australia's warmest and driest year on record, both contributed to the devastated fires which ravaged the country. But going back a second to the Greens Party, criticising the Morrison government was not the correct move on their behalf, as they essentially stated that Scott Morrison could have stopped climate change, which is implausible. But if we look at their motivation for these remarks, it becomes clear that they also have their own agenda to push, which is this pro-environmental behaviour, and they've used the bushfires to promote their own ideas and say, hey, we could have handled this better. Which is fine, but they could have gone in a better way of getting the idea across. Similarly, Greenpeace Australia also criticised the Morrison government, blaming them for the scale of the bushfires. On their website, they published an article stating that it's time that our leaders act like climate change is an emergency. They claim that the number one cause of this climate crisis is the burning of fossil fuels, which is indeed backed by science, but then they go on to state that Australia's emissions are rising. This contradicts this graph published by the Australian Department of the Environment and Energy, which depicts the emissions both per capita and per dollar of real GDP actually decreasing. So I'm not sure where Greenpeace is getting the data from, but I think it's safe to assume that the data provided by the Department of the Environment and Energy is most likely more credible. it seems that Greenpeace has either accidentally or purposefully referenced incorrect information to push their agenda, which in this case is to sway Federal Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction, Angus Taylor, to, and I quote, take climate change seriously. And they aimed at doing so by convincing people to sign a petition. They seem to have been unsuccessful in doing so. Moving forward to the state of the bushfires in mid-December, the smoke began to cover many eastern cities and the fires showed no signs of slowing down. And during this troubling time, the country looked to its leader, Prime Minister Scott Morrison. But where was he? Nowhere to be seen. This is because on December 15th, right near the peak of the fires, the Prime Minister seemed to have departed for another country. Some early speculators suggested that the PM was on a trip to the Middle East to visit Australian troops, as is the norm for the PM around this time of year. But all of these rumours were put to rest when Greens MP David Shoebridge sent out this tweet which stated that Scott Morrison was actually on a family holiday in Hawaii. Now, in his defence, the PM only had a small window of time to spend with his family in the midst of international visits and whatnot. But at the time, it sparked a lot of backlash against the PM, since various parts of the country were in a state of emergency. Naturally, various memes and news articles criticising him for his holiday emerged, including this beautiful spin-off of Rupert Holmes' Escape, which I'm just going to let speak for itself.
There's some fires in Australia, they have been burning too long. But the Aussie cricket team should keep our spirits strong. But then the heat kept increasing, I prayed for answers in bed. What's the best solution? To Hawaii I head. 'Cause I like pina coladas and leaving fires on a plane. I'm not fully funding a firefighting campaign. And you guys say it's 'cause of climate change that the fires are ablaze. But what I love is coal mining, so what I did was escape.
Now, on a more serious note, whether or not the criticism around the Prime Minister's week-long holiday was justified is debatable, with Sky News host Chris Smith suggesting that Scott Morrison is entitled to a holiday.
But I find the criticism of the Prime Minister in recent days way over the top. Yes, he was slow to deliver decent aid and support to those who'd been worst hit by the drought. I think that's fair criticism. But I'm not actually referring to that. I'm referring to the flogging he's copping right now, especially on social media this week, for taking a holiday. And maybe it's because he's gone on a holiday to Hawaii. I don't know.
Another Sky News host stated that we have a Deputy Prime Minister for a reason, and that it's the state government's responsibility to handle the fires, not the federal. So Sky News, a right-leaning broadcaster, seems to suggest that the PM is justified in taking a family trip in the midst of the bushfires. Opposition leader Anthony Albanese also seemed to concur with this opinion, labelling the criticism of the PM's holiday as cheap. The users of Twitter, on the other hand, were not happy with ScoMo's Hawaii vacation, with hashtag Hawaii and hashtag HowGoodIsHawaii trending on Twitter at the time. Samantha Maiden, an Australian journalist, even used the platform to advertise a line of Hawaiian-themed shirts featuring the PM's face on them, with 100% of the proceeds allegedly being donated to charity. Now, in the end, the Prime Minister did end up shortening his vacation after the death of 2 firefighters, but he only cut it back by 48 hours. He also sent out a formal apology to the people of Australia, claiming that the vacation was a promise to his kids. One user on YouTube commented that 2 young men in New South Wales will never be able to keep a promise to their children again, referring to the comments made by the PM in his apology. Upon return to Australia, the Prime Minister decided to visit some of the affected towns in New South Wales, and was met harshly with many of the residents and firefighters heckling him and refusing to shake his hand. Whether or not this was an appropriate response is debatable. In the Prime Minister's words, it's not like he was out there with a hose or in a control room, which is true, but it also seems somewhat irresponsible of him to leave for a holiday during a climate emergency. Overall, the majority of backlash against the PM for his holiday seems to have been sparked by the media. So, after many months of burning, all of the bushfires were eventually extinguished in early March, once and for all ending one of the worst bushfire seasons to hit Australia. One thing we can learn from this rollercoaster is that some groups can go to great lengths to push their agendas and promote their ideas. Thanks for watching.